continue on with our 1 week kind of transition into the social issues of indigenous cultures and society as a general. Many years ago, when I was a grad student, I had kind of a position, we've already explained that position a little bit. It's that of an Ashkabewas, where I had this responsibility, and actually still have that responsibility to kind of help guide people toward the elders, that sort of thing. And quite a few people, for one reason or another, would find their way back into their culture through school. It's because it's the place, I think, where a lot of people just find those connections they can't find in their communities, especially if they live in bigger cities. So, one day I was sitting at my desk, and I had this really cool office. My office was about half the size of this room. It was actually a really nice suite. And the reason I had a nice big office is because I had a lot of student group activity, things like that, and they were nice enough to afford that one office for me. I was sitting in my area there, all of a sudden I got a knock on the door. So I went over and I answered the door, and there was a very small, very dark woman standing there. And I'd met her before, but was never really introduced, and she just looked sad. She had a really sad look on her face. And I said, come on in. I said, what can I do for you? And she says, well, I want to kind of trace back my lineage, and I need to find out kind of who I am, because I'm having all these issues about things that just aren't making much sense. And I've always been told that I have what she called Cherokee roots. And she said she really needed to find out who she was. It was a deep burning need that she had. So we sat down, and she did the right thing. She brought a package of pipe tobacco and handed it to me, and I accepted it. And one of the things that I do, or one of the things that I used to do when I was up there, is I do one of two things early on. I would either take people up to one of the reservations, or I'd take them down to the Phillips neighborhood in Minneapolis. And it turned out that this was on a Wednesday. That following Saturday, I actually had a meeting down at the American Indian Center in Minneapolis, Franklin and Bloomington in Minneapolis. It's surrounded by projects. If you don't know what projects are housing units that are stacked on top of each other. So you have a large number of poverty-stricken people in a very highly concentrated population area. So we go down there, and by the way, they have nothing to do. That's the big issue, really. So we're on our way down there, and as we're driving down there from north of St. Cloud, it's about 80 miles down there, I'm looking at her, and I know that she's a little bit scared. I could kind of see it in her eyes. I wasn't really sure, what the issues were, that kind of thing, but she's very quiet. Usually when people are going down to Minneapolis with me, or up to the res, they're really talkative. They have a million questions. They want to know this, they want to know that, and on and on and on and on. And one of the things I always did when I got down there, they had a really good cafe on Franklin Avenue. It's gone now, but it used to be called the Chef Cafe. And they served burgers that were like that thick, about that big around. It must have been about a pound and a half, 2 pound burger. So I usually parked there and walked down to the Indian Center. And that seemed like a pretty good idea, because we would be getting done at this meeting right about lunchtime. So I parked there when we got down to Minneapolis. And all the way into Minneapolis, you could see her just kind of looking around, and she had kind of a puzzled sort of expression. And when we get down there, I park in front of the Chef Cafe, and I looked over again, and she's kind of looking down, and she's got her backpack in her hand. She always carried her backpack everywhere. She was a non-traditional student, too. So I got out, and I walked around the car, and was waiting on the sidewalk, and she finally got out of the car, and it was like she just took a deep breath when she did. She stood up on the sidewalk, and I said, if I were you, I'd just leave your backpack in the car. She was kind of afraid to leave the backpack in the car. because of all the stereotypes of people breaking into cars down there, which by the way really isn't that, it's no different than it is anywhere else. To make her feel better, I opened the trunk and we threw the backpack in the trunk. And got it nice and safe and sound and all that kind of stuff. And we started walking from the Chef Cafe about 5 blocks down to the American Indian Center. And as I was walking, you could see that she had kind of a frightened look on her face. And if you've never been in South Minneapolis, it's not hard to understand why. Some people feel very, very comfortable there. Some people don't feel very comfortable at all. And we're walking, and it's very inner city. It's an urban area. Maybe aside from Kansas City, and you know, it's probably the only urban area near here. So we're walking, and you can see the cities. It's city. You know, there's, as you look to your left, there's boarded up buildings and stuff. And this is Franklin Avenue, which is one of the streets in Minneapolis that used to be very, very rough. It's been kind of taken over by yuppies a little bit now. So we're walking down Franklin Avenue, and you know, there's boarded up windows. There's stuffed garbage in the streets and things from typical urban setting sorts of issues, and there's a lot of traffic, and there's lots of people standing around. That's what happens in the urban areas. You have people standing around everywhere. And there's people mingling, and the interesting thing about it is there's a lot of different people. It's not like back in St. Cloud where you have basically your German Catholic community, and you don't see a lot of different things. As we're walking, she's kind of feeling a little bit anxious. You can tell all people are feeling anxious. We pass a gas station on the left. It's a very old, famous gas station because it was notorious for a lot of crime at that particular point in time. But the gas pumps have cardboard boxes over them. They're completely and totally abandoned. And the front windows of the gas station are broke out, that kind of thing. And now it's a taxi stand where a lot of taxis will go just to wait for calls and stuff. We come across something that's incredibly interesting and not all that uncommon in the inner city. There's an Indian man laying across the sidewalk. And in downtown Minneapolis, one of the things that they do quite often, drive around the city and pick up kind of vagrants or homeless people or people who are intoxicated like him. And what they'll do is bring them to detox, which is always full. God forbid they be around the edge of the park, you know, so tourists could ever see what really goes on in Minneapolis. They stop in the side of the road and they have their lights on and they'll go out and check people and stuff like that. And they've been accused of racially profiling and all kinds of stuff going on there. So we have a decision to make. Do we leave this Indian guy here? One of the options is to just kind of set him up against the wall. What do we do? He's in pretty bad shape. He's wearing those old bumper tennis shoes. I don't know if anybody knows what those are. You're probably not old enough to remember those. But they're thick white bottoms, you know, they're really old tennis shoes. His jeans are in pretty bad shape, really, really dirty. He's wet himself, which is kind of a humiliating thing. He's wearing a orange t-shirt that's ripped under the arms and it's pretty dirty. His hair is a mess. He's pretty cut up on his knuckles. You can tell that he's falling down. That's one of the things when I worked for the ambulance company we used to look for is they're taking falls. They have signs of falls on them. Then we got to check them for head injuries, you know, and make sure we're not jerking their head around and things like that. And he's got some scarring on his face and stuff, and he's unshaven. And if you know anything about Indian people, Indian whiskers grow at a rate of about an inch every 5 to 6 years. So it's one of those situations. He's in pretty rough shape. Right next to him is his medicine bag. Unfortunately, in Minneapolis, the medicine bags aren't the traditional medicine bags that we tend to carry. His medicine bag is alcohol. And it's sitting right there. So I kind of kicked that bag over to him. And it's pretty light. I know that it's empty. It's one of those, they call it a fifth. I don't know if you're into drinking yet, or into drinking at all, but but it's a smaller, it's a smaller bottle. It's hard to say because you guys, most of you guys are still pretty young. I think the drinking age is 21, right? Yeah. So, that maybe in the park would be a better place than laying across the sidewalk and getting spat on and kicked and, you know, called names and that kind of thing. So, we kind of say Gigawabaman Minawal, which is we'll see you later in Ojibwe, and I step over him, and the minute my foot hit the ground, I mean, it was the strangest thing. I just went back, and I started to think about my first child. And it's weird how that happens, because I've mentioned in here that there are times when I kind of feel a little guilty going back to my ribs. Because very few people have really made it off the ribs. The minute I stepped down, I kind of remembered the birth of my first child. Her name is Margot. By the way, she's going to be down here talking to you, so you can mention this story to her if you want to embarrass her when she gets here. And I remember the day that she was born. She was born via a C-section, and when she was born, she had really long hair, and she was the darkest baby in the room, so she was the little showcase baby, you know. And because she was a C-section, her head was like perfect, so they used her to show all the other moms how to bathe and all that kind of stuff. And I was just a kid. I didn't know anything about being a father. I didn't know anything about anything. I thought I knew everything, but I found out I didn't know anything. The cool thing is, my Auntie Phil, who died about a year ago, delivered the baby. In fact, she delivered all three of my biological daughters. So back then, I couldn't go in the delivery room if it was a C-section. So I'm waiting in the lobby out there, and all of a sudden, my aunt comes out and says, "Gary, come in." And I'm half sleeping, right? So I get up and I start walking, following her, and she says, "Here, put this gown on." And she holds this gown up, you know, and I put this cool hat on, and these things over my shoes, and the whole shebang. And I went walking in there, and I look over, and I see babies all over the place, and it kind of hit me there, and I went, holy crap, these are like people. It's like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into this time? And my aunt says, "Come on over here." And I come and looking around, and I mean, this is a pretty big hospital. There's probably 20, 25 babies in there. And I'm like, jeez. And she walks over and she picks up this little bundle, right, out of this little bassinet. She brings it to me, and it was weird because I thought that was like the cutest one there. You always do, right? And it was weird because I held this little baby in my hands. You know, her little butt fit right in the palm of my hand, and she was all full of like this gooey stuff, and it's like, man. And I'll tell you, nothing forces you to grow up quicker than holding your own child in your hand. And she said, "Bring him over here." And I said, "Bring her over where?" She says, "Bring her over here." And I brought her over, and she had this little lukewarm tub of water, about that much water there. And she said, "Set her in." So I said, "She's not going to drown, is she?" Said, "Not unless you drown her," she said. So I set her in the thing, and I had she said, "You hold your hand under her head, you know, and just hold it there." And I'm, you know, washing her off and stuff, and at that point in time, babies can't really see. They just see like shadows, like ghosts, that kind of thing. But I could have swore that she was like looking at me. And I'm washing her off, and you know, I pick her up, and God, I could have dropped her. It was really weird thinking back. I mean, I could have. So I was just a dumb kid, you know. But I didn't. And I'm bundling her off, you know, and all kinds of stuff, and I spent a little time in the old rocking chair they have in the nursery. It made me feel like I was 20 years old going on 50, which was kind of cool. I felt like the most important person in the world at that point in time, holding the most important person in the world. So after about an hour, you know, she said, "We got to put her down now. She's got to get to sleep and stuff." And I went in, and I looked in the door. My ex-wife, who had just been through major surgery, back then a C-section was major surgery, and she was out, so I thought, I just better go home. And my aunt says, "Gary, you just better go home and get some rest now." So I walked down, and it's a big hospital, right? So I'm walking out, and I get in the car and close the door. turn the key on and turn the radio on, because I'm almost afraid I won't get home because I'm so exhausted, emotionally exhausted especially. The song comes on the radio, which just flipped me out. There's a phrase from the 70s, flip me out. And it's Stevie Wonder. It's, isn't she lovely? Isn't she wonderful? Isn't she precious? Less than a minute. And I'm like, holy crap! And I'm thinking, this must be like some kind of sign or something. But as I've talked to elders over the years, they said, that was a sign, dumbass. So, I go home and I get some sleep and things, and started to raise my kid, which is never easy. And like I've said in here before, it doesn't come with an instruction book, but you do it. You just do it. I get a kick out of it now because I've got grandchildren and I watch how idealistic my kids are until Grandpa gets there, right? And it's like all the rules go out the window. They're very careful not to have me babysit kids too young. It was my second child. My second child, as I was walking, I started to think about that. She's one of these kids that everything she does just turns to gold. You just want to strangle and you hold their head underwater for a while and that sort of thing. The one thing that she took up when she was very young is she was on an elite gymnastics team, a very elite gymnastics team. Her coach was a guy named Janos Zirin. So this team in Minnesota, I mean, when we talk about like the Twin City Twisters, that we blew them out of the water. They didn't score a point. I mean, so it was, that's how good they were. The problem is, of course, is when you do that, you train 7 days a week for 8-9 hours a day, and you become socially inept. And she started to realize that way before we did, because we're the typical American sports mom and dad, and we kind of take on the persona of our kids and that kind of thing. And it's like, one day I just stepped back and said, whoa, what the hell are we doing? I've got a kid here whose bones ache and she's 9 years old. So, we let that go. She forgot about it in high school then. She goes out for cross country. She's in the weight room one day and she's lifting weights, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one of her old teammates comes in. Says, aren't you Annie? And she looks up and says, yeah, why don't you come out for gymnastics? And my daughter said, well, I'm kind of past that, my back aches, my knees. And so she went out for 2 events, and she's not a power person, right? She's a finesse person. So she went out, her thing was the beam and the floor. And she's got incredible flexibility. I mean, when she got started in gymnastics, the reason the coach saw her is because she was at a kind of a tumbling thing. She's laying on her belly and she takes her feet and puts them in front of her face, right? Backwards. And it's like, I went into shock. It's like, where the hell did you learn that? And you didn't get that from me because I can't get out of bed most mornings, right? So her goal then was to get on they call it the Wall of Fame at Technical High School. And in order to do that, you have to nail a 9 or better, which is very difficult. So she's building throughout the year. It's her senior year, and she's having kind of problems doing some things, and she realizes it's not as easy as it used to be because she's been out of it for a while. But the old man's all hyped up, And you can see her getting better. But would she get good enough in time was the question. Now she does this thing on the beam where she does this backflip, lands on her belly, then she's at the end of the beam with her head here, and she brings her toe up over and touches the beam, then she does this whole backflip and dismounts. Well, she's been having trouble with landing on her belly and then at the same time bringing her foot over. She's been falling. So it comes time for regionals, or actually state. And it takes place at Technical High School because it's got a huge gym and all that kind of crap. The old man's a photographer, right? So I get up into the window well by climbing on mats somewhere I'm not supposed to be. And I got a perfect view of the end of the beam. And her name gets called, and this is a long process, but there's a lot of gymnasts. But her name gets called eventually, and she gets up there. And I saw this aura around her that I've never seen before. It was incredible confidence, and I was looking through the camera, and it was like, I kind of had to look again. she gets up on the beam and she's doing her routine, and it comes time for that move. So I get my camera ready, and I've got a pretty nice camera. I'm just holding it, you know, getting all the shots. I get, all of a sudden, boom, 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 and her leg just comes over perfect. It's like, and I knew she had it. I knew it at that point. She does everything backwards and flips off, and she just never do that routine again. That was the end. And she had the sense. My third biological daughter is a pill. She's the comedy person right now. And right now she's really struggling. Just had another grandson through her. When she was young, she was a comic. She was the funny one, right? I remember the first day of kindergarten. Remember the first day you went to kindergarten? All that fun. Oh, it was a blast. It's a blast for the parents. You got a cake? Whoa, you got lucky. So I get this thing in the mail, right? And it's all this. It's this really short list of what the daughter, which your kindergartner, needs to bring to school. So she gets all excited. So I did most of the parenting. So we go to Kmart, and then pushing the cart down Kmart aisles and stuff, and it's funny. I never realized what was out there. She's throwing stuff into the cart left and right. You know how many markers there are out there? This is unbelievable. There's fat markers, there's skinny markers, there's fine line markers, there's fine line glitter markers, there's fine line glow markers, there's fine line fluorescent markers, there's fine line. It goes on and on and on. And of course, she has to have one of each. And I'm literally seeing things fly into the cart. And pretty soon, I mean, it's getting deep. I mean, why do you need a calculator, a scientific calculator in kindergarten, right? And the crayons, you remember the crayons. I'm thinking, yeah, the 24 pack's good enough, and not for her. She gets that big box of 7,500 crayons with the sharpener in the back, you know? God. And then it comes time for the expensive stuff, the clothes. So we start pushing over the clothes aisle. And I'm not exactly a fashion plate, as you've guessed. But we're over by the clothes aisle, and thank God for Garanimals. You ever heard of those? They're little tags that if you match the lion shirt with the lion pants, they go together. But the thing about them is they've got the Garanimals embroidered on the pockets. So when your little girl's walking, her pockets are going like, it's really cute. And she likes these little bib overalls, and she did at the time, right? Because the old man, that's how I dressed. So, first day, she gets all this stuff home, and the first day of school's coming, it's the night before. She's got this huge backpack, you know, and she packs it up once, not quite good enough, so she unpacks it, packs it up again, not quite good enough. And this goes on for most of the night. She finally gets everything packed, and she's got this huge backpack full of junk, you know. And I'm wondering, I'm kind of embarrassed, actually, because she's going to bring this stuff to school, and the teacher's going to go, yeah, you got a good old man there. Wake up the next morning, she's up at like 4 a.m. She's really excited. Gets me up, and I make this nice breakfast for her and everything, and get her all dressed, and she puts this backpack on. She's got to walk like this because the backpack is so big. But we're out there, and my daughters and I have always been very, very close, you know. And when the school bus comes, and you can see it coming down the road, the old man starts to tear up. He says, baby, you know, going off to school. I'm thinking, yeah, she's going to be just like me. She's going to sit in the back of the bus, and she's going to be a badass. The bus pulls up, and she climbs up the bus steps, and I thought, yeah, she's going to turn around and wave to the old man now. No wave. And I'm like, and she sat in the front of the bus. Holy crap. I've got some teaching to do here. And for the first month, that song, I tell you, the wheels on the bus go. Every time I hear that now, and I learned more about the bus driver than I ever want to know. The bus driver's family, I knew the entire life story of that bus driver. Remember in school, the kids who used to hang out with the Jim? Get to the Indian side. When we have our meeting, and Jennifer was the woman's name, and we're talking, and we get out of there, and she goes, wow. She never knew there was so much going on, you know. We start walking back. We get to where the Indian guy is, and he's still there. He's kind of moved up a little again. He's got his head propped against the wall a little bit. He's very, very intoxicated. Went over and talked to him a little bit in Ojibwe, and he's all of a sudden he smiles. You know, it might be the first time he smiled in a long time. I said, "Giwunaminawa," which means how you doing? And he kind of shakes his head and stuff. A lot of Indian people, even if they don't speak the language, there's phrases and words that float around the res, so you kind of know those sorts of things. And so I squat down, start talking to him a little bit, and found out that he's from a pretty prominent family from up around the Staples area. I was talking to him a little bit, and there are a couple things that you need to know. You know, he was homeless. He didn't have a place to go. He had his stuff stashed someplace. I don't imagine he's got too much of anything. But it's very, very difficult living in that situation because from South Minneapolis, you can see downtown. And if you've ever come into Minneapolis from the south on a highway called 35W at night, it's lit up like a cathedral, right? All the glass buildings. And it looks like a crystal cathedral, no pun intended. But it's amazing because it represents all the money. And it's a constant reminder to those who don't have the money that they don't have the money. And the way Minneapolis is set up, South Minneapolis is kind of the impoverished area of Minneapolis. North Minneapolis is also an impoverished area, and kind of everything else and around it. Some of the suburbs are some of the richest suburbs in the country. The Edina area, the Minnetonka area, some of the biggest mansions, Lake of the Isles. I mean, it's incredible. You have houses the size of the library. And the people who don't have, the have-nots, you know, they have to kind of look at this stuff all the time. So as we're leaving, you know, I didn't know how to leave him. His medicine bag is that alcohol. He's not lucky enough to have a real medicine bag, right? So I gave him my medicine bag. And I also gave him a $20 bill, and Jennifer goes, you know, he's not going to spend it on food. I said, I know. So what? You know, and this is what a lot of people question me about when I get to this part of the story. And I've told this story probably 1,000 times. But he doesn't have a Dakota Care card. He doesn't have a Blue Cross Blue Shield card. What he has is what he's wearing, basically. His insurance policy is in that brown bag. And his insurance policy is the only thing that he has that dictates to him on a daily basis that he has a way to escape this situation. And I know that he's going to take that $20. I know he's probably going to go buy some Boone's Farm wine, right? Boone's Farm, because you can get 6 bottles for $1.50. It's very cheap. But so what? If that's what he needs to escape for a while and get out from underneath this threshold, this tidal wave of this multitude of oppression that has gotten him here to begin with, so be it. If you don't want to take the money and go down to the Chef Cafe and buy a burger, that's your problem. People ask me all the time, Gary, about the casinos especially. And everybody thinks all Indians are rich now because there's casinos out there. They don't understand how the casinos work, right? And it's like, if that's what it'll take to help him get through the night, then I'll be the first one to get him drunk again, because if I don't, somebody else is going to. And I know that that's usually not an excuse, but when that's all you've got to isolate and conceal yourself from the oppressive nature of things that are going on around you, if you need to do that, then do it. And that's the way I feel. And most Indian people I know who have alcohol problems are not alcoholics. I think my brother, who I think is an addict, is a little bit different because he has avenues of escape if he chooses to use them. But he can't. There's no other option. What a lot of people don't realize is that when you get to a point of destitution in your life, and you haven't eaten in a week, where there's no escape, where you have a constant bombardment of issues that are killing you internally, you've got to find a way to get away from it. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, because a lot of people have those up there on the board. When you look at those two sets of configurations in the far right-hand side of it, we talked a little bit about this before. When you look at that top line of triangles, which configuration is your eye drawn to? The circle. Why? Because it's different, right? When you look at the next configurations down there, which one is your eye drawn to? The green ones or the black one? The black one. What happens with people of color in this society, and this isn't necessarily a race thing, this is a burden thing. This is about privilege. What happens in this society is people of color have the burden of being the one that gets the attention. Did I tell you the story about Raziel's and Carrie's? You're standing in Raziel's one day. Then you go outside to have a smoke with your buddies, right? So a couple of you go out there, the rest stay inside. All of a sudden you look over at Carrie's, which I know this has happened there before, and the bouncer all of a sudden throws somebody into the street. It turns out to be this very, very overweight Indian guy who's standing in the middle of the street singing. And he's singing, "What a Wonderful World." Completely intoxicated. The only reason that comes up is because I've actually seen it. The guy over at Raziel's is going to poke his head in the bar and say this. And this is something that nobody can deny, because the surveys say that this is what's going to happen, right? "Hey, Bill, come on out here. There's this crazy Indian guy standing in the street singing." So everybody runs over, gets to the door, looks up. "Ah, yeah. Oh, poor guy." Next night, you're down there again for some strange reason. This time you're at Carrie's. And all of a sudden you look over at Raziel's. And the bouncers throw this African-American guy into the street. And he's standing in the middle of the road. And he starts singing. Say he's very overweight. Guys over at Carrie's going to do the same thing. "Hey, come on out here. Look at this black guy, this big fat black guy standing in the middle of the street singing." The guy is out there and he's putting on a show, you know. You've seen it. The next night you're back over at Raziel's. And you're looking over at Carrie's. And all of a sudden the bouncers throw this other guy out into the street. This time, it's a very overweight white guy. You poke your head into Raziel's and you say this. "Hey, come on out, there's this fat guy singing in the middle of the street." So everybody comes out and goes, ah, look at the fat guy singing in the middle of the street. And he's out there singing, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And a car comes by and barely misses it. What was the difference in those three scenarios? Yep. You'll never hear it. For the white guy, it's the fat guy. For the black guy, it's the fat black guy. For the Indian guy, it's the fat Indian guy. You see, this is what I was going to say to you. This is something you haven't heard before. People from the dominant culture don't have the burden of carrying their race with them every step of the way through life. And that is one hell of a burden. I'm not an alcoholic. Everybody around me is. For some reason, I was spared that. I think a lot of it is they just never liked the taste of beer, as I've said before. But if I'm in Cary some night, listening to the band, and I happen to have a beer in front of me, and one of you, or a group of you come in and say, look at Cheeseman. He's sitting there with a beer in front of him, and he talks about Indian alcohol in the classroom. How can he do that? But yet, if you're in there, you can do what you want. Because the stereotypes aren't stuck to you like they are to me. You see, I have to carry that stereotype even if I'm not an alcoholic, even if I don't drink. If I ever get seen drunk in town, my career here is over. If you're seen drunk, people are going to laugh and joke about it the next day. That's a burden. That's the privilege. One of the many privileges, and I can talk about this stuff all day, that you have that I don't, and that every person of color doesn't, especially Indian people, especially in South Dakota, because the stereotypes here are rampant and they're stuck more than any other place I've ever seen them. Oh yeah, the closer you get to the res, the worse they are. And I got to tell you, the most Indian people I know don't drink. And a lot of that is because maybe they've been through rehab and have pushed it aside. Well, they just don't drink. And people are amazed when they hear that because they think that all Indian people drink. And it might surprise you to say that most Indian people do not drink. I'm not talking about getting drunk. I'm talking about do not drink. And I bet that for a lot of you, that is probably astounding because that's not what you think about, is it? You can be honest. If I were you, I've heard the stereotypes a million times too. But that burden of having to carry, and I just gave you two small examples. What about the burden of trying to rent a house? I have gone with other Indian people who've tried to rent houses in Vermilion and they don't get the house. They have perfect credit records and do not get the house. And I've heard 4 or 5 incredible excuses now. And I'm not sure how they get away with it. I think there's a lot of politics that go on in South Dakota that we don't really think much about. They go on everywhere. Could you imagine, though, being strapped with that burden? Okay, let's take it one step further. Walk into a bar. There's 30 people in the bar, 29 of them are men, 1 woman. Who gets the attention? Say it. The woman. So you walk into the bar, and this woman's standing there, and she's wearing a short skirt because it's her prerogative. All of a sudden you start hearing whispers around the crowd, right? Now, look at her wearing a short skirt. What's the big word that women get slapped with? That you have to carry throughout your lives unfairly. Going to Jimmy John's and you see somebody in a wheelchair. There's 50 people that are not in a wheelchair, one that is in a wheelchair. Where's your attention going to go? Of course it is. That's a burden that they have to carry. The other side of that is being ignored, of course. It's almost worse to not pay attention to people than it is to pay attention to them. So, we have a natural kind of thing where we're going to always be looking at the thing that's different. And the reason we're so fascinated in it, for the most part, is because we fear what we don't know. And that's where the resistance comes in. That's where the dissonance comes in. That's why I tell you in this class you're going to be learning things that you've never heard before, because I know when I say that it's going to raise levels of dissonance. And then for a small percentage of you, you're going to get resistant.